But it is, yeah, it's heavy on my mind right now of how much of a privilege it is to be your pastor, to be charged to bring the word. And it's a deep delight that I get to do it on today, Trinity Sunday. It's one of my favorite days of the year. Last week was Pentecost, right? Which makes today Trinity Sunday. It's a Sunday that a lot of churches skip over, frankly. But I think I understand why. Because if you're going to make a list of doctrines that are like quote unquote right, and also doctrines that are like totally irrelevant to what it means to be an actual Christian, I suspect that the Trinity would be relatively high on that list, right? Like everybody knows it's the right thing. But I think for most of us, the Trinity was something that the church kind of had like these weird obsessions about a long time ago and got it right, nailed it down, and now we just don't really think about it that much. Might even be gravamen material. Like you can be a real Christian without it, right? And at one level, that is true. Because Reformed Christians believe that being a Christian is first and foremost and rooted in God's choosing of us, not in the fact that we have all of our mental furniture, our theology perfectly aligned. Being a Christian starts with God's call for us. So in a way that's kind of true, but I would argue that you can't live as a Christian without ingesting the Trinity. I would argue that you can't live in the fullness of life that Christ died to share without a functional understanding of the Trinity. And you might be surprised to hear that I think it's actually not that hard. Because the Trinity is not like just a thorny logical problem. It's not an impossible math or physics equation. It's not a matter of like sacred but illogical doctrine over mind thing that you just need to kind of turn off your brain, check the right box, and move on with your life. A functional understanding of the Trinity is actually as easy as this. It's knowing that the relationship that Jesus has with God, that relationship is also yours. That's why the Trinity matters. I'll say it again. The relationship that Jesus has with the Father is by the presence, the empowerment, the reality of the Spirit, that is also yours. You might have heard some Christians say, it's talking about their Christianity. Let's say it's a relationship, not a religion. Right? Have you heard that before? Anybody? Maybe you might have said it, right? And the thing is that this is kind of true because Christianity is about a relationship. But fundamentally, Christianity is about Jesus' relationship with God. It's more about Jesus' relationship with God than your relationship with God. Because it is Jesus' relationship with God that Jesus does share. It becomes ours. It matters immensely to us. But at the core, the relationship that is at the core of Christianity is Jesus' relationship to God. The wild, impossible beauty is that Jesus' child relationship with God the Father is one that is made real in you by the Spirit. Now, just knowing this isn't quite enough. You have to live it out to get the benefit of it. And Christians have always struggled to live as if this is true. I think we'll hopefully you have a better sense of how and why it's hard as we move through this. But know that as we work through this, if this feels hard to you, if this feels like it's a change of categories, it's a change of paradigm, it always has been. And this is actually why Paul wrote this section to the church in Rome that we're going to read right now. Our text is one of those texts that proclaims the gospel, that in Jesus, God has changed everything. And the heart of the change is that we are no longer slaves, but we are children of God. Listen to the word of the Lord. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, then he who raised Jesus Christ from the dead will give life also to your mortal bodies through his Spirit that dwells in you. And so then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit that bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. This is the word of the Lord. The church that I was raised in talked a lot about sin as rebellion. That was kind of the basic framework of what sin was. Sin was rebelling against God. It was doing the things God didn't like, didn't want. God was the authority of the universe, and sin is doing everything God doesn't want. Right? Spitting in God's face was an image of kind of when they really wanted to crank it up and dial it up, like this is how bad it is, right? Sin, rebellion, spitting in God's face, and obviously this was like everybody knew the answer to this in Sunday school, right? Like this is bad, rebellion is bad. But there's a little bit of a problem. Has anyone ever watched Star Wars? Because here's the thing: in the real world, rebellions are kind of cool, right? They're kind of cool, and I think rebellions are cool sometimes in real life because we all have experience with authority that's unjust, right? You know, QED, Star Wars. We all have experience with authority that's unjust, and so we all have had some experience like that, where rebelling is kind of like refusing to submit to this power relationship, right? And so rebellion is this kind of self-actualization, like people standing up for themselves, right? And not just taking everything lying down. Andor is the best, by the way. Oh, wow, wow. That's okay. Watch Andor if you have watched Star Wars. It's really worth it. So rebellion is not bowing to power, right? And that's why it works to talk about sin that way, right? Talking about sin and God is we're not respecting God's power. I don't know about you, but this was the way I thought about sin growing up. And why Jesus was good news is that Jesus was the way, that Jesus was God's offer to wipe the slate clean, right? And I can start over again. Here's what I find really interesting about Romans 8. Romans 8 does talk about a power dynamic between humans and God, right? Or just what it is to be human is to experience a power dynamic. But the way, the word that Paul uses, the image that he uses here, isn't one of rebellion. Like Paul doesn't start by saying, like, we're in a state of rebellion and we need Jesus to wipe our slate clean. What he says that we are in a position of slavery. Now, slavery is different from rebellion. Slavery is never cool. There is no good slavery. Slavery is a power dynamic where the vulnerable, the one without power, is more or less completely defined by the activity and the relationship of the one with power. It's why humanity is diminished and destroyed in the face of slavery. Because in a human relationship, that's what happens. Humanity is removed if you remove. And because of this dynamic, from a master's perspective, the definition of what makes a good slave, I'm going to say this again, I don't want to be like audio clipped or everything. There's no good slavery. From a master's perspective, what makes a good slave is perfect obedience. Perfect obedience is what, from the master's perspective, is the difference between, I can't even say the difference between, I think you know what I'm saying. But this is what it is. It is a relationship that, from the master's perspective, is completely dependent upon obedience. Here's what I think. I think we all know what it looks like to live in a world where our relationships are defined by our performance. I think we all know what it's like to live in a world where a perceived lack of obedience changes everything. It's certainly outside the church. I think it's inside the church too. I think that too many Christians have welcomed Jesus, can check the right boxes and will praise God as Lord, but have failed the most critical of transformations that the Trinity makes real, and that Paul is giving witness to here in Romans 8, and that is the move from slave to child. I think this is actually just as true, maybe even more true in the church, that we are filled, we have a new master that we worship whose name is God. But that fundamental relationship that exists only insofar as we are obedient I see that active everywhere in the church. Sure, maybe Jesus has wiped the slate clean. We get one do-over chance. But now the new master is watching to make sure the slaves don't mess up again. Because when obedience breaks relationship, the relationship you're describing is slavery. The Roman church was apparently struggling with this because Paul goes at it, he goes for the jugular here. He goes right for it. Paul makes abundantly clear. He says, all who are filled with the Spirit, all who are led by the Spirit are children of God. Paul wants the Roman church to experience this transition away from an experience of slavery to an experience of being a child, where the fear of disobedience gives way to a curious hope and a childlike trust. Church, every one of us needs this. Every one of us knows a little. I think every one of us knows a little bit about this, but all of us need so much more practice living into it. All of us know a little bit of this. But there is so much more freedom that Christ bought for you than you understand. Same for me. I think our practical unwillingness to recognize, or just the fact that we don't live into it, I think this is why the church so often fails to be distinguishable from the broader culture. Because we live like slaves just like everybody else most of the time. We live like we're defined by our obedience. We live like we're still slaves. And if you believe you are trapped, you will act that way, even if you are fully free. That's why I think that sometimes I think the best metaphor for evangelism and like the impact of the gospel is Juneteenth. You guys know about Juneteenth? About what I'm talking about here? I want everybody to know. So hear this. So Juneteenth is coming up on Thursday. And it is a celebration that spreads back, it reaches back to the Civil War. And what it marks is the day that the news of emancipation reached Texas. And here's what's interesting about that. All the slaves in Texas had been legally freed. Like, legally, they were already free. But they didn't know it. They didn't know it. And Juneteenth marks the day when those two things came into alignment. The freedom that was real became enacted when they knew it and when they lived into it. This is the shift. This is why it matters that we know deep in our souls that because of Jesus, because of Jesus, because of the Spirit, because of God, because of this Trinity, this true sonship that Jesus shares with God, that relationship is yours by the Spirit. That is such a massive change from this old way we have all been living, which is always looking over our shoulder, wondering if that one thing that you did that one time was the thing that screwed up all these other things. Right? That thing that happened a year ago, maybe 50 years ago, that's always stuck in the back of your mind. Maybe that is why. That is not the relationship that you have with God. whether you know it or not. But it matters to know. It matters to know, to feel in your bones the freedom of being a child. We all need to learn what it means to be a child of God. We need to learn what it means to move deeply in a way that knows that the relationship started literally outside of you. A relationship that you were literally born into. A relationship that is yours because of the love of your parents. To be a child, here's the thing, to be a child doesn't take obedience off the table, but it roots it in gratitude. Obedience as a child is something you want to give a loving parent. You know, I do think it's worth mentioning on this Father's Day that not all children have experienced this kind of childhood belonging with their parents. There are people in this room who have been abandoned by their parents, either physically or emotionally. This is why it's really important that the church pins its hope, not centrally on family values, but on the God that makes those family values something intelligible in the first place. We should strive to love well in every relationship we have. But let's not make idols, shall we? It's also upon me to say today that as a church, in the church, the single most common reason for children to be abandoned by their family is by coming out as gay or lesbian or trans. And I have to wonder if this is, at least in part, because of a gospel imbibed that says that Jesus forgives and wipes the slate clean, gives you a second chance, yes, but after that, don't screw it up. And that is so deeply held that we can't even be around other people that we feel might threaten us. If parents think that their kids are sinning for being simply who they are, and so they kick their kids out to preserve their own sense of obedience to God, well, maybe this happens in denominations too. If we do not start with the basic, foundational reality that God and God alone is the one who calls the church, that it is God alone who decides who belongs, that it is God who makes the church, that it is God who invites, that it is God who makes alive, that it is God that grounds our entire being. If we do not start there, then we are talking about a country club and not a church. Friends, we all need the Trinity. We need this reflexive, gut-level cry from our bones that says, Abba, Father. And to know that when we cry, Abba, Father, did you notice the order? That's not our spirit reaching out to God. That is God's spirit confirming to us that you are a child of God. All things have changed. We need the radical centering of Jesus to understand that our bodies, our lived lives, our relationships are not our own, but we belong, body and soul and life and death, to our faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. We are not defined by our obedience, but by the fact that we are children. Jesus' child relationship with God, freely shared, made possible by his death, made real by the Spirit, to make humans fully alive. Because that's what God wants of you. You're not defined by your obedience. You're not defined by your ability to pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps. You are defined by the relationship that is Jesus's with God. And so we gather here today to take the very flesh and blood, to ingest by faith the life that is God, the life that is Jesus. And so I say the Lord be